The Hirogen female commander Uma had never seen a human male up close before, and it caught her completely off guard. As she stands face to face with Paul Tucker, the security chief of the HSS Intrepid, her momentary hesitation proves costly. Earth's orbit erupts in chaos as the Hirogen invasion fleet materializes without warning. Uma's ship leads the charge, its weapons tearing through the unprepared human defenses. Alarms blare across the HSS Intrepid as enemy fire rocks the vessel. Captain Sarah Chen barks orders, but it's clear the humans are outmatched. Uma materializes on the Intrepid's bridge in a flash of light, flanked by heavily armed Hirogen warriors. Their plan is simple: capture the flagship and use it as a staging ground for the invasion of Earth. The bridge crew scrambles for weapons as the Hirogen open fire. Paul Tucker leads the defense, his security team pouring out of the turbolifts. The ship's corridors become a war zone. Disruptor fire leaves scorch marks on the walls as humans and Hirogen clash in close quarters. Bodies fall on both sides as the invaders push deeper into the ship. Uma fights her way toward the main computer core, certain that controlling it will give her dominion over the vessel. She rounds a corner and comes face to face with Paul. For a split second, she freezes. His physical form is unlike anything in Hirogen intelligence reports. The raw power and determination in his eyes catch her off guard. That moment of hesitation is all Paul needs. He strikes, knocking the weapon from Uma's hands and pinning her against the wall. Their eyes lock. Paul has the upper hand, but he doesn't strike the killing blow. Instead, he restrains her, taking the Hirogen commander captive. The tide turns. With their leader captured, the Hirogen assault falters. The Intrepid's crew manages to repel the boarding party, but at a steep cost. The ship is heavily damaged, its engines offline. They drift helplessly in Earth's orbit as the rest of the Hirogen fleet regroups. In the brig, Paul begins his interrogation of Uma. She sneers, proclaiming humanity's weakness and inferiority. Yet there's a flicker of something else in her eyes when she looks at Paul, a grudging fascination she can't quite hide. The ship's AI, Arya, quietly informs Captain Chen of an interesting development. Uma's vital signs and hormone levels show clear signs of attraction toward Paul. It's unexpected, but it might be the advantage they desperately need. Chen pulls Paul aside, her expression grim. "I need you to get close to her," she orders. "Use this attraction. It may be our only shot at learning their invasion plans." Paul nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. As he returns to the brig, Uma's eyes track his every move. The fate of Earth hangs in the balance, with humanity's survival potentially hinging on the connection forming between a human security chief and an alien invader. Paul Tucker took a deep breath as he approached the brig, his mind racing with the weight of Captain Chen's orders. He keyed in the access code, the door sliding open with a soft hiss. Uma's eyes locked onto him immediately, her gaze intense and searching. "I've been authorized to offer you limited freedom of movement on the ship," Paul said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Under strict surveillance, of course." Uma's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident in her features. "Why?" Paul shrugged, maintaining a casual demeanor. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill. You're our guest, after all." As they left the brig, Paul led Uma through the corridors of the Intrepid. The ship buzzed with activity, crew members working tirelessly to repair the damage from the Hirogen attack. Uma watched with undisguised curiosity as humans of all shapes and sizes moved with purpose, their purpose evident in every action. In engineering, Chief Mike Reeves barked orders as his team wrestled with a damaged power coupling. Uma observed silently as Reeves, his muscular frame glistening with sweat, physically wrenched a stubborn component into place. "Impressive," Uma murmured, almost to herself. Paul glanced at her, noting the interest in her eyes. "Humans are more resilient than you might think." As they continued their tour, alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. Paul's comm badge chirped. "Tucker, report to the bridge immediately." Captain Chen's voice came through, tense but controlled. On the bridge, Arya's holographic form shimmered into view. "Captain, I've detected an incoming Hirogen scouting party." Paul's mind raced, an idea forming. He turned to Uma, who stood warily at his side. "We need your help." Uma's eyes widened in surprise. "You expect me to betray my people?" I expect you to help us avoid unnecessary bloodshed, Paul countered, his gaze steady. Communicate with the scouts. Tell them we've developed a new weapon capable of disabling Hirogen ships with a single shot. Uma hesitated, conflict clear on her face. Paul stepped closer, his voice low and intense. You've seen what we can do, how quickly we adapt. Make them believe it. After a long moment, Uma nodded. She spoke into the comm system, her voice confident and commanding as she relayed the false information to the Hirogen scouts. Minutes later, Arya confirmed their retreat. Well done, Paul said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Uma met his gaze, a mix of emotions swirling in her eyes. In the following days, Paul involved Uma in various aspects of the ship's operations. He arranged combat training sessions, ostensibly to compare human and Hirogen fighting techniques. As they sparred in the holodeck, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Uma pinned Paul to the mat, her face inches from his. Your species continues to surprise me, she breathed, her grip loosening slightly. Paul seized the opportunity, flipping their positions in one swift move. We're full of surprises, he replied, acutely aware of their close proximity. As Uma spent more time among the humans, her certainty in Hirogen superiority began to waver. During a strategy meeting, she found herself drawn into the discussion, offering insights into Hirogen tactics, almost before she realized what she was doing. The Hirogen rely heavily on their cloaking technology, Uma explained, pointing to a holographic display of a Hirogen warship. But it creates a vulnerability in their shield grid. Paul leaned forward, his eyes intent. How so? Uma hesitated, then continued. There's a fluctuation in the shield harmonics when the cloak is engaged. A precisely targeted energy pulse could... Suddenly, Uma's face contorted in pain. She clutched her head, crying out as she collapsed to the floor. Paul rushed to her side, panic rising in his chest. Arya, what's happening? He demanded. The AI's voice was calm but urgent. I'm detecting a surge of neural activity. It appears to be some kind of fail-safe mechanism in her neural implant. Paul cradled Uma's head, his mind racing. We need to disable it, now. As he worked frantically to save Uma's life, the ship shuddered violently. Captain Chen's voice came over the comm system. All hands, battle stations, the Hirogen fleet is launching a full-scale attack on Earth. Paul looked down at Uma, her face twisted in agony. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and the key to its survival lay in the mind of the alien woman before him. As he fought to disable the implant, Uma's eyes fluttered open, meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. In that moment, as alarms blared and the ship rocked with weapons fire, the connection between them deepened into something neither had anticipated. Paul knew that whatever happened next would change the course of the war and their lives forever. Paul's fingers moved deftly over Uma's neural implant, his brow furrowed in concentration. With a final adjustment, the device powered down, and Uma's body relaxed in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his with a mixture of relief and wonder. You saved me, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Before Paul could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comm system. All hands, battle stations. The Hirogen fleet is launching a full-scale attack on Earth. Paul helped Uma to her feet, their eyes locked in a moment of silent understanding. The connection between them had deepened into something neither had anticipated, but there was no time to dwell on it now. We need to get to the bridge, Paul said urgently. As they raced through the corridors, alarms blared and crew members rushed to their stations. The Intrepid rocked with each impact from Hirogen weapons fire. When they reached the bridge, Captain Chen's face was grim as she received a transmission from Earth's High Command. The Hirogen fleet is positioning for a full-scale invasion, Chen announced, her voice taut. Multiple ships have entered the solar system. We're Earth's last line of defense. Uma stepped forward, her posture straight and determined. I can help. Without the neural implant, I see things differently now. Let me assist you in understanding their tactics. Chen nodded, gesturing to a tactical display. What can you tell us about their approach? As Uma began explaining Hirogen battle strategies, Chief Engineer Mike Reeves burst onto the bridge, his face flushed with excitement. "Captain, I've made a breakthrough. Using the information Uma provided, we can adapt Hirogen technology to enhance our shields and weapon systems." "Make it happen, Reeves," Chen ordered. "We need every advantage we can get." While Reeves and his team worked feverishly to implement the upgrades, Paul and Uma pored over tactical data, identifying weaknesses in the Hirogen fleet's formation. The Intrepid shuddered as another volley of weapons fire struck its hull. Suddenly, Arya's holographic form materialized on the bridge. "Captain, I've detected a security breach. A Hirogen strike team has boarded the ship using advanced cloaking technology." Paul's hand instinctively went to his phaser. "I'll organize security teams to repel the boarders. Uma, I need you with me." As they moved through the ship's corridors, the sounds of battle echoed around them. Disruptor fire scorched walls, and human and Hirogen bodies alike lay motionless on the floor. Paul's security teams engaged the invaders at every turn, using Uma's insights to anticipate their moves. Rounding a corner, they came face to face with Krav, the leader of the Hirogen strike team. His massive frame dwarfed Paul as he raised his weapon. "Traitor!" Krav snarled at Uma. "You disgrace the Hirogen by siding with these weaklings?" Uma's response was swift and decisive. She lunged forward, knocking Krav's weapon aside as it discharged, the energy blast barely missing Paul's head. In that moment, her choice was clear. The two Hirogen grappled, a blur of brutal strikes and counterattacks. Paul joined the fray, his human agility complementing Uma's strength. Together, they forced Krav back, but the Hirogen warrior's rage made him a formidable opponent. "I will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy for this betrayal." Krav roared as he retreated, disappearing into the chaos of the battle. With the immediate threat neutralized, Paul and Uma returned to the bridge. Captain Chen was deep in discussion with Earth's Defense Command. "Our fleet is mobilizing," Chen reported, "but they won't arrive in time to prevent the initial assault." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of her crew. "I have a plan, but it's risky. We'll use the Intrepid as a Trojan horse to infiltrate the Hirogen command ship and disable their fleet from within." Paul stepped forward, Uma at his side. "Captain, we volunteer to lead the mission. Our combined knowledge of human and Hirogen tactics gives us the best chance of success." Chen studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Agreed. Prepare your team. We launch as soon as Reeves completes the shield modifications." As Paul and Uma left to gather their equipment, the view screen lit up with the ominous sight of the Hirogen invasion force advancing towards Earth. Admiral Xanthor's command ship led the formation, its massive silhouette eclipsing the stars. Time was running out. The fate of Earth now rested on the shoulders of a human security chief and a Hirogen commander united by an unexpected bond. As they prepared for their desperate mission, Paul and Uma exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Whatever the outcome, they would face it together. Together. As they prepared for their desperate mission, Paul and Uma exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Whatever the outcome, they would face it as one. Paul turned to Uma, his voice low and urgent. "We need to make the Intrepid look like one of your ships. Can you help us with that?" Uma nodded, her eyes gleaming with willpower. "I know every curve and line of our vessels. With your engineer's skills, we can create a convincing disguise." They rushed to engineering, where Chief Mike Reeves was already elbow-deep in circuitry. Paul quickly explained their plan, and Reeves's face lit up with excitement. "Holographic projectors," he said, snapping his fingers. "We can use them to create a visual overlay. Uma, I'll need your expertise on the details." For the next few hours, the team worked tirelessly. Uma guided Reeves through the intricacies of Hirogen design, while Paul coordinated with the rest of the crew to implement the changes. The ship's exterior slowly transformed, jagged lines and alien textures replacing the smooth hull of the Intrepid. Captain Chen's voice came over the comm system. "Tucker, status report." Paul wiped sweat from his brow. "Almost there, Captain. Uma's knowledge has been invaluable." "Good," Chen replied. "Report to the bridge when you're finished. I have a plan." On the bridge, Chen laid out her strategy. "We'll power down non-essential systems and drift towards the Hirogen fleet. If we can mimic a damaged scout ship, we might just slip past their defenses." Uma leaned forward, studying the tactical display. It could work. Hydrogen commanders often ignore damaged vessels, considering them unworthy prey. As the Intrepid approached the Hydrogen armada, tension on the bridge was palpable. Paul stood close to Uma, their shoulders almost touching. Through the view screen, they watched as massive Hydrogen ships loomed ever closer. "Hold steady," Chen murmured, her fingers tightening as she gripped her chair. Suddenly, a Hydrogen vessel moved to intercept them. Paul's hand instinctively went to his phaser, but Uma placed her hand on his arm, shaking her head slightly. Tense moments passed as the Hydrogen ship scanned them. Then, to everyone's relief, it moved on. "We're in," Chen said, exhaling slowly. "Now for Phase 2. Tucker, Uma, you're up." In the shuttle bay, Paul and Uma donned modified Hydrogen armor. As Paul struggled with an unfamiliar clasp, Uma stepped close, her fingers deftly adjusting the armor. "Thank you," Paul said softly, acutely aware of her proximity. Uma's eyes met his, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "We fight together now," she replied. Lieutenant Zara Malik and Sergeant Chris Tanner joined them, completing their strike team. As they boarded the disguised shuttle, Paul briefed them on the plan. "Uma will use her command codes to get us on board," he explained. "Once inside, we move fast. Malik, you're on systems. Tanner, you handle explosives. Questions?" There were none. As the shuttle launched, Paul watched Earth grow smaller in the viewport, the weight of their mission settling on his shoulders. Uma's voice pulled him back to the present. "We're approaching the command ship. Brace yourselves." The massive bulk of Admiral Xanthor's vessel filled their view. Uma transmitted her codes, and after a heart-stopping moment, they were granted access to the docking bay. As they disembarked, Paul marveled at Uma's transformation. Her movements became more rigid, her posture imposing. Following her lead, the team blended seamlessly with the Hydrogen crew. They made their way through twisting corridors, Uma's intimate knowledge of the ship guiding them. As they neared the central control hub, Paul overheard two Hydrogen warriors discussing the battle. "The humans fight with unexpected ferocity," one said, mandibles clicking in agitation. "It matters not," the other replied. "They will fall, as all prey must." Paul exchanged a glance with Uma, seeing his own willpower mirrored in her eyes. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. "You!" Paul turned to see Krav, the Hydrogen strike leader, staring at them with dawning recognition. In an instant, the corridor erupted into chaos. Krav lunged at Uma, his massive frame bearing down on her. Paul reacted instinctively, throwing himself between them. The three collided in a tangle of limbs and armor, crashing into a nearby console. As Tanner and Malik engaged Krav's guards, Paul and Uma fought back-to-back against the enraged Hydrogen leader. Uma's strength and Paul's agility complemented each other perfectly, keeping Krav off balance. But Krav was a seasoned warrior. With a roar, he swung his weapon in a wide arc. Paul ducked, but Uma wasn't fast enough. The blow caught her in the side, and she stumbled. Seeing Uma wounded ignited something primal in Paul. With a surge of adrenaline, he launched himself at Krav. His fist connected with shocking force, driving the larger alien back. Caught off guard by the human's ferocity, Krav faltered. Seizing the opportunity, Paul pressed his advantage. In a flurry of strikes, he forced Krav to the ground, finally subduing the Hydrogen warrior. Panting heavily, Paul turned to Uma. She stared at him, a mix of pain and admiration in her eyes. "You fight like a Hydrogen," she said, wincing as she held her side. Paul moved to her, concern etched on his face. "Can you continue?" Uma nodded grimly. "We must. Earth depends on us." As alarms began to blare throughout the ship, the team raced towards the control hub. They burst through the doors, quickly overpowering the surprised technicians inside. "Malik, start the hack," Paul ordered. "Tanner, set those charges. Uma and I will guard the entrance." As their teammates worked feverishly, Paul tended to Uma's wound. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos around them faded away. Paul's hand lingered on Uma's arm, the touch conveying more than words ever could. The moment was shattered by Malik's urgent voice. "I'm in the system, but I've triggered additional security protocols. We don't have much time." Through the doors, they could hear the thundering footsteps of approaching Hydrogen soldiers. Admiral Xanthor's voice boomed over the ship's comm system, ordering all units to converge on their location. Paul looked at his team, then at Uma. They had come so far, risked so much. Failure was not an option. "We finish this," he said, his voice steel. "Whatever it takes." As the first wave of Hydrogen warriors reached the control hub, Paul and Uma stood side by side, weapons raised. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and the next few moments would decide everything. Everything. As the Hydrogen warriors poured into the control hub, Paul and Uma moved in perfect synchronization, their weapons blazing. The air crackled with energy discharges as they fought to buy time for their teammates. "Malik, status!" Paul shouted over the din of battle. "Almost there!" Malik's fingers flew over the alien console, her face illuminated by flickering displays. "I've accessed their main computer system. The data's streaming in." Tanner's voice came through their comm units, breathless but determined. "Charges are set and primed. Ready on your order, sir?" Paul ducked as a disruptor blast seared the air where his head had been moments before. Uma's return fire dropped the attacker, her aim precise and lethal. "Fall back," Paul ordered, laying down covering fire as Malik disengaged from the computer terminal. They retreated deeper into the ship, Uma leading the way through a maze of corridors. As they ran, Paul's mind raced, processing the information Malik had uncovered. "There!" Uma pointed to a schematic on Malik's datapad. "The central power core. If we can destroy it, we take out the whole fleet," Paul finished, a plan already forming. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and the heavy footfalls of Xanthor's elite guards echoed behind them. Paul made a split-second decision. "Tanner, I need a diversion. Detonate charges in Section 3 Os Alpha." "With pleasure, sir," Tanner replied, a grin evident in his voice. Seconds later, the ship shuddered as explosions ripped through a distant part of the vessel. The pursuing footsteps faltered, then a portion peeled away towards the blast site. Paul turned to Uma, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "We go for the core. Malik, Tanner, make your way back to the shuttle. We'll rendezvous there." As they parted ways, Paul and Uma moved with practiced stealth, their movements fluid and coordinated. They navigated through maintenance shafts and rarely used access ways, Uma's knowledge proving invaluable. Rounding a corner, they stumbled upon a group of Hydrogen scientists huddled around a menacing device. Uma's eyes widened in recognition. "A resonance cascade initiator," she whispered. "It could neutralize Earth's planetary defenses in minutes." Without hesitation, Paul raised his weapon, but Uma stayed his hand. "Wait, I have a better idea." Moving with swift precision, Uma approached the device. The scientists, recognizing her as one of their own, barely reacted to her presence. In a series of lightning-fast movements, Uma manipulated controls and removed key components. "It's done," she said, rejoining Paul. "The weapon is useless now." As they neared the power core, the ship's internal security became more intense. They were forced to engage in close-quarters combat, Paul's agility complementing Uma's raw strength. Suddenly, a massive figure stepped out from behind a bulkhead, blocking their path. Admiral Xanthor, his armor gleaming and his eyes burning with fury, towered over them. "Traitor!" he snarled at Uma. "And you, human, you dare infiltrate my ship?" Xanthor lunged forward, his movements blindingly fast despite his size. Paul barely managed to dodge the first strike, feeling the wind from the blow rush past his face. Uma engaged Xanthor, matching his strength, but the Admiral's experience showed as he fended off her attacks. Paul circled, looking for an opening. He darted in, landing a series of quick strikes, but Xanthor seemed to shrug them off. With a roar, the Admiral backhanded Paul, sending him crashing into a nearby console. Uma's eyes flashed with anger. She redoubled her efforts, her strikes becoming more precise, targeting weak points in Xanthor's armor. Paul shook off his daze and rejoined the fray. Together they pressed Xanthor back, their movements in perfect harmony. Paul feinted left, drawing Xanthor's attention, allowing Uma to land a crushing blow to the Admiral's knee. As Xanthor stumbled, Uma saw her opportunity. With lightning speed, she struck a specific point on the Admiral's neck. Xanthor's eyes widened in shock, then rolled back as he collapsed, unconscious but alive. Paul stared at Uma, a mixture of awe and something deeper in his eyes. "How did you—" "A technique known only to Hirogen elders," Uma explained, her voice soft. "I chose to incapacitate, not kill." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Then, remembering their mission, they pushed on to the power core. The core itself was a marvel of alien engineering, a pulsing column of energy that thrummed with almost unchecked power. Paul and Uma worked in tandem, their hands flying over control panels as they initiated the overload sequence. "We have 3 minutes," Uma announced as warning klaxons began to blare. They ran, retracing their steps through the ship's winding corridors. Explosions rocked the vessel as systems began to fail. Paul stumbled as a particularly violent tremor shook the deck beneath their feet. Rounding the final bend before the shuttle bay, they encountered a scene of chaos. A massive support beam had collapsed, blocking their path. Paul rushed forward, only to cry out as a section of ceiling came down on top of him. Uma turned back, her eyes wide with fear. For a split second she hesitated, freedom just steps away. Then without a word, she moved to Paul's side. With a display of incredible strength, Uma lifted the debris pinning Paul down. He crawled free, wincing in pain, but alive. Uma helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they limped towards the shuttle. Malik and Tanner were at the controls, the engines already whining as they prepared for emergency launch. Uma all but threw Paul into the shuttle before leaping in herself. The bay doors were already beginning to buckle as the ship's structural integrity failed. "Go!" Paul shouted, and Tanner gunned the engines. They shot out of the disintegrating Hirogen vessel seconds before it exploded in a massive fireball. The shockwave buffeted their small craft, but Malik's skilled piloting kept them stable. As they sped towards the Intrepid, Paul turned to Uma. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. Paul reached out, gently touching the wound on Uma's arm, where a piece of shrapnel had caught her during their escape. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Uma's response was cut short as Captain Chen's voice came over the comm. "Good work, team. The Hirogen fleet is in disarray. Earth's defenses are holding, but we're not out of the woods yet. Get back here quickly. We need you for the next phase." Paul and Uma exchanged a look of commitment. They had won a significant victory, but the battle for Earth was just getting started. As the Intrepid grew larger in their view screen, they knew that their greatest challenges, and perhaps their greatest triumphs, still lay ahead. Ahead, as the shuttle docked with the Intrepid, Paul and Uma exchanged a determined glance. They had struck a significant blow against the Hirogen, but the battle for Earth was far from finished. The moment they stepped onto the bridge, Captain Chen approached them, her expression a mix of relief and urgency. "Excellent work, both of you. But we're not out of the woods yet. The Hirogen fleet is in disarray, but they still pose a significant threat." Paul nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Captain, with the data we've gathered and Uma's insider knowledge, we might be able to turn the tide definitively." Chen's eyes lit up. "What do you have in mind?" "A task force," Uma interjected, her voice steady despite her fatigue. "Combining our understanding of both human and Hirogen combat tactics." "Exactly," Paul agreed. "We can develop strategies to exploit their weaknesses, maybe even use their own technology against them." Captain Chen considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Make it happen. I'm putting you two in charge of this operation." Over the next few hours, Paul and Uma worked tirelessly with Earth's military strategists. They pored over the data Malik had extracted from the Hirogen command ship, cross-referencing it with Uma's extensive knowledge of Hirogen fleet operations. As they worked, Paul couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly he and Uma complemented each other. Her intimate understanding of Hirogen technology filled the gaps in the human analyst's knowledge, while his tactical thinking helped translate that information into actionable strategies. Their efforts bore fruit when Malik made a breakthrough. "I think I've found a way to integrate some of the Hirogen comm protocols into our systems," she announced, her fingers flying over her console. "If we can broadcast false command signals, we could sow even more confusion in their ranks," Paul finished, excitement building in his voice. Uma leaned in, studying the data. Yes, this could work, but we'll need to act fast. The Hirogen will adapt quickly once they realize what we're doing. As they finalized their plans, an alarm blared through the ship. Lieutenant Commander Tanner's voice came over the comm system, tense and urgent. Captain, we're detecting a massive energy buildup in one of the Hirogen ships. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Paul and Uma rushed to the main view screen, where a Hirogen vessel, larger than the others, was maneuvering into position. Uma's face paled as she recognized the configuration. That's Craig's flagship, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's activating a planet-killer weapon. The gravity of the situation hit Paul like a physical blow. Everything they had accomplished, all the progress they had made, could be undone in an instant if that weapon fired. Captain Chen's voice cut through the tension on the bridge. Options, people. I need them now. Paul's mind raced, analyzing and discarding plans as quickly as they formed. Then his eyes met Uma's, and he saw the same realization dawning in her expression. We need to board that ship, Paul said, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was proposing. Uma nodded, her posture straightening as she faced the captain. Paul's right. We're the only ones with the combined knowledge to disable that weapon from the inside. Chen looked from Paul to Uma, her expression grim. You understand this is likely a one-way trip? Paul felt Uma's hand brush against his, a fleeting touch that spoke volumes. We understand, Captain, but it's the only way to save Earth. As the rest of the bridge crew prepared for the operation, Paul and Uma made their way to the armory. The weight of their mission hung heavy between them as they geared up in silence. Finally, Paul spoke, his voice low. Uma, if we don't make it back... Uma turned to him, her eyes shining with an intensity that took his breath away. Without a word, she closed the distance between them, pulling him into a fierce embrace. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and desperate, conveying all the unspoken emotions that had built between them. When they parted, Uma's voice was husky with emotion. We will make it back, Paul. We have to. With renewed perseverance, they joined their strike team in the shuttle bay. As the doors opened to the vastness of space, Paul felt Uma's presence beside him, steady and unwavering. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The shuttle accelerated towards Craig's flagship, weaving through the chaos of the battle. Paul's hand tightened on his weapon, his mind focused on the task ahead. As they neared their target, he knew that the fate of Earth now rested on their shoulders. The real fight was about to begin. The shuttle docked with the Intrepid, and Paul and Uma disembarked, their bodies weary but their spirits high. They had struck a significant blow against the Hirogen, but both knew their work was just the beginning. As they stepped onto the bridge, Captain Chen approached them, her expression a mix of pride and urgency. Outstanding work, both of you, but we're not out of the woods yet. The Hirogen fleet is in disarray, but they're regrouping quickly. Paul nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. Captain, with the data we've gathered and Uma's insider knowledge, we might be able to turn the tide definitively. Uma stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fatigue. A coordinated strike on their command structure could cripple their ability to mount an effective assault. Captain Chen considered for a moment, then nodded decisively. Make it happen. I'm putting you two in charge of this operation. Over the next several hours, Paul and Uma worked tirelessly with Earth's military strategists. They pored over the data extracted from the Hirogen command ship, cross-referencing it with Uma's extensive knowledge of Hirogen fleet operations. As they worked, Paul couldn't help but marvel at how seamlessly he and Uma complemented each other. Her intimate understanding of Hirogen technology filled the gaps in the human analyst's knowledge, while his tactical thinking helped translate that information into actionable strategies. Their efforts paid off. The combined Earth fleet, guided by Paul and Uma's insights, launched a series of precision strikes against key Hirogen vessels. The alien armada, already reeling from the loss of their flagship, began to fracture under the onslaught. From the bridge of the Intrepid, Paul and Uma watched as the Hirogen fleet retreated, jumping to hyperspace in small, disorganized groups. A cheer went up from the crew, the tension of the past days finally breaking. Captain Chen's voice cut through the celebration. Well done, everyone. We've won the day, but there's still work to be done. Set course for Earth. We need to report to United Earth Command. As the Intrepid made its way back to Earth, Paul and Uma found themselves in a quiet corner of the observation deck. They stood side by side, watching the stars streak by. "We did it," Paul said softly, still hardly believing it himself. Uma turned to him, her eyes shining with an intensity that took his breath away. "We did. Together." Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had come to mean to each other. The Intrepid's return to Earth was met with jubilation. As the ship docked at the orbital station, Paul and Uma could see the crowds gathered in the viewing galleries, cheering and waving. News of their role in repelling the Hydrogen invasion had spread quickly. As they disembarked, they were immediately surrounded by a throng of reporters and government officials. Camera drones buzzed around them, capturing every moment for the billions watching planetside. "Commander Tucker, Uma, how does it feel to be the saviors of humanity?" a reporter called out. Paul felt Uma tense beside him, unused to such attention. He squeezed her hand reassuringly before addressing the crowd. "We're just two individuals who were in a position to make a difference. The real credit goes to every person who stood up to defend Earth, both in space and on the ground." Uma nodded in agreement, her voice steady as she added, "The Hydrogen are a formidable species, but so are humans. Perhaps now both sides can see the value in peace rather than conflict." Their words were met with another round of cheers and a barrage of questions. Before they could respond, a stern-looking woman in a crisp uniform approached them. "Commander Tucker, Uma, I'm Admiral Yuki Tanaka of United Earth Command. If you'll come with me, the Security Council is waiting to debrief you." As they followed Admiral Tanaka, Paul and Uma exchanged a glance. They had won the battle, but it was clear that their journey was far from finished. The corridors of power awaited them, and with it, the chance to shape the future of human-Hydrogen relations. The debriefing lasted for hours. Paul and Uma recounted every detail of their mission, from the initial infiltration of the Hydrogen flagship to the final moments of the space battle. The Security Council members listened intently, their faces grave as they grasped the full scope of the threat Earth had faced. As the session wound down, one of the counselors leaned forward. "Commander Tucker, Uma, your actions have not only saved countless lives, but have also opened up a unique opportunity. We believe that with your combined knowledge and experience, you could play a crucial role in establishing peaceful relations with the Hydrogen." Paul felt a mix of excitement and trepidation at the counselor's words. He glanced at Uma, seeing his own emotions mirrored in her eyes. Admiral Tanaka spoke up. "We're proposing a diplomatic mission to the Hydrogen homeworld. You two would be at the forefront, working with our diplomatic corps to negotiate a lasting peace." The magnitude of the proposal hung in the air. Paul found himself nodding slowly. "It won't be easy," he said, "but if there's a chance for peace, we have to take it." Uma's voice was firm as she added, "The Hydrogen respect strength. The fact that humans stood against them and prevailed will make them more open to negotiation than they've ever been before." The council members exchanged looks of approval. "Then it's settled," Admiral Tanaka said. "We'll begin preparations immediately. The fate of two species may well rest on the success of this mission." As they left the council chambers, Paul and Uma found themselves alone for the first time since their return to Earth. The weight of their new responsibility settled over them, but so did a sense of hope. Uma turned to Paul, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "This mission, it will not be without its challenges. My people may see me as a traitor." Paul reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together, just like we have from the beginning." Uma's fingers tightened around his, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Together," she agreed. As they walked towards the shuttle that would take them to their new quarters, Paul knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but with Uma by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. The future of human-Hydrogen relations was uncertain, but for the first time there was hope for a peaceful coexistence between the two species. As Paul and Uma stepped out of the council chambers, their minds still reeling from the weight of their new diplomatic mission, an urgent message crackled through their comms. Captain Chen's voice, tense and controlled, cut through the air. Commander Tucker, Uma, report to the Intrepid immediately. We've received intelligence about radical human attacks in the border region. Your diplomatic mission may have just become a rescue operation. Paul and Uma exchanged a glance, their earlier sense of hope quickly replaced by tenacity. Without a word, they broke into a run, racing towards the shuttle bay. Within minutes, they were aboard the Intrepid, the ship's engines humming to life as they prepared to depart. Captain Chen met them on the bridge, her face grim as she brought up a holographic display of the border region. We've got reports of a group calling themselves Earth First staging attacks on Hirogen outposts, Chen explained, her fingers dancing over the controls to zoom in on a cluster of disputed systems. The Hirogen are retaliating, and we're on the brink of full-scale war. Uma leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she studied the tactical display. This sector is under the control of Korra's clan. She's a respected elder, known for her wisdom. If we can reach her, we might have a chance at de-escalation. Paul nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. We'll need to act fast. Captain, set a course for the border. Uma and I will prepare for infiltration. As the Intrepid streaked through space, Paul and Uma retreated to their quarters to strategize. The room was sparse, functional, but it had become a sanctuary for them amidst the chaos of recent events. I'll disguise myself and infiltrate the Earth First group, Paul said, pulling out a compact holographic emitter. My background in human tactics should help me blend in. Uma's face was a mask of concentration as she considered her role. I'll return to my Hirogen roots. Korra doesn't know me personally, but my clan markings should grant me an audience. They spent the next hours preparing, refining their cover stories, and synchronizing their communication devices. As they worked, Paul couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come, from enemies to allies to something more. The Intrepid dropped out of warp on the edge of the conflict zone. Through the view screen, they could see the flashes of weapons fire in the distance. Captain Chen turned to Paul and Uma, her expression solemn. Good luck, both of you. The fate of 2 species may rest on your success. Paul and Uma made their way to the shuttle bay, the gravity of their mission palpable in the air between them. As they prepared to board separate shuttles, Uma reached out, gripping Paul's arm. Be careful, she said, her voice low and intense. These radicals won't hesitate to kill if they discover your true identity. Paul covered her hand with his own, offering a reassuring smile. You too. Your people might not be as welcoming as we hope. With a final nod, they parted, each heading to their respective shuttles. As Paul's craft sped towards the Earth First encampment, he activated his holographic disguise. His features shimmered and changed, transforming him into a nondescript human militant. Landing amidst a group of battered ships and makeshift structures, Paul stepped out into the harsh sunlight of an alien world. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of weapons discharge. You there, a gruff voice called out. Paul turned to see a burly man approaching, his uniform adorned with the Earth First insignia. Identify yourself and state your business. Paul straightened, adopting the rigid posture of a soldier. Private Jack Hawkins, sir. I'm here to join the fight against the Hirogen scum. The man's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Paul for a moment before nodding. Report to Commander Reeves for assignment. And welcome to the front lines, soldier. As Paul made his way through the camp, his senses were on high alert. He took in every detail, from the positioning of their weapons to the whispered conversations of the militants. Something about the atmosphere felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Meanwhile, Uma's shuttle approached the Hirogen flagship. Her heart raced as she prepared to face her own people once again, this time under very different circumstances. As she docked and stepped out onto the familiar deck of a Hirogen vessel, she steeled herself for the challenges ahead. A towering Hirogen warrior blocked her path, his scarred face a testament to countless battles. State your purpose, outsider, he growled. Uma drew herself up to her full height, her voice steady as she replied, I seek an audience with Elder Korra. I bring important information about the human attacks. The warrior's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Korra's name. He studied Uma for a long moment before grunting and gesturing for her to follow. As they wound their way through the ship's corridors, Uma's mind raced, formulating her approach to the clan elder. Back in the Earth First Camp, Paul had reported to Commander Sarah Reeves, a stern-faced woman with a calculating gleam in her eye. As she outlined the next planned attack on a Hirogen outpost, Paul's suspicions grew. The tactics she described seemed oddly precise, almost as if... Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Paul turned to see a group of militants dragging in a captured Hirogen scout. As the prisoner was brought before Commander Reeves, Paul's blood ran cold. He recognized the captive as one of Uma's clanmates. With the situation escalating on both sides, Paul and Uma found themselves racing against time to uncover the truth and prevent a war that threatened to engulf both their species. The real challenge was just beginning, and the fate of human-Hirogen relations hung in the balance.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.